Halito, and welcome to Native Chalk Talk, a podcast by natives for all. Here we're keeping our native ancestors' stories and history alive while also sharing with you our native cultures, traditions, and more. I'm Rachel Youngman, a Choctaw originally from Anadarko, Oklahoma. I hope you'll enjoy this journey with me as we learn from our Native American guests. And stay tuned for the end of each episode where we'll talk about some great ways to support Native causes and or Native-owned businesses. Let's get started. Y'all, I am so excited to chat with my talented guest today and to share with you the big things she's doing here in Chicago. And we'll also get to hear her ancestral history and stories, which I know you'll all love. In fact, we've got some mysteries to solve, so we're asking for your help, listeners. Stay tuned for that. Okay, coming up on the 7th and 8th of November, 2023, perfectly fitting because that's during Native American Heritage Month. I'll be narrating at a concert composed by none other than Chickasaw composer, violinist, and artistic director Brandi Berry Benson. Brandi, welcome to Native Chalk Talk.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for being here. Or Yakoki, I should say. It's like,
Yakoki!
yeah.
Now, I thought there were no Native Americans in Illinois, but lo and behold, there are actually two of us, right?
At least two of us, many more.
But as some of you listeners know, I live in Oklahoma part of the year and here in Illinois most of the year. So we're coming to you today from Illinois together. And by the way, Brandy's from Texas. So all of y'all in Texas, hello to
Yeah,
your friend that you're loaning us up here.
exactly. Howdy, y'all.
Howdy,
Yeah,
y'all. We were just talking before we started about how much we miss Oklahoma and Texas right now. So, but
totally.
now, Brandy, you corrected me when we were at Starbucks the other day that there are more American Indians here in Illinois. So I look forward to hopefully expanding my network. I guess there's some where you work, right?
Yes, actually, I'm on faculty at the School of Music at Northwestern University, and it turns out so where I coach the Baroque music ensemble there, my path to walk there from where I would usually park, I would pass by the Center of Native American and Indigenous Research like
Oh,
all the time. Of course, when I got connected to, the fine folks in that building and realized that I was literally walking by it all the time, well, then of course I was like, well, this was meant to be. So, because they hold a number of events throughout the academic year at Northwestern University, including a powwow that usually happens in April, which is really an extraordinary event that's put on by the students with their help. And I'm actually in the process of becoming what they call an affiliate. And so
perfect.
once that becomes formalized, then they will have Indigenous affiliates in all of the schools in Northwestern University. So being in School of Music was the last that they did not have yet. And
So am I invited to the powwow in April
of
or?
course,
Okay,
yeah,
good.
it's open to the public. Yeah, it's open to the public, and yeah, it was. I went for the first time this past April, and was really just such a moving experience to see. And it's open to all tribes, all tribes who
Perfect.
are being represented at the university. So they do a
That's
grand
great.
entrance, which was really neat to see, and then they have a number of activities that just take up kind of it seemed like a weekend long event, but
That's fantastic. And so this was great information for me to know there's a powwow in April as well as anyone else. I know I have listeners from Illinois. So if we've got any Indigenous or non Indigenous people that want to join, I'll see you in April.
yeah.
We'd love to do that. So before we go any further, I just found out that you released an album in June. Tell us about that.
Yeah, totally. So this album was actually I started composing it during the pandemic. So March 2020 happened. As a performer, of course, I watched all of my performing work basically get canceled. Well, not basically,
Oh,
totally get
right.
canceled
Yeah.
and postponed and then canceled again. I decided, well, I was always composing on and off. And
Hmm.
so I thought I would focus in on that a bit more. And so I also was pregnant at the time too with my little girl, who is now a little over 2 years old.
Aw.
And so I was composing this music. I actually recorded the album in my second trimester. So there I was in the studio,
Oh,
pretty
really?
pregnant. Yeah. So, which was really neat. It was really neat to that.
Special.
I feel like she was, yeah, listening from inside, right?
Right? She was part of it.
Yeah, she was part of it, and I got almost all the edits done, and then she entered the world in September of 2021, and then, after some time, I finished up those edits, and then I was finally able to release that album this past June, and it was it's actually my first album of all original work. I had released other albums with
Nice.
my ensemble that I direct, but I had never released an album of all music that I had composed. And part of that was a track on there that I called Chickasaw Suite. That was actually what started me in on this whole path of just um, getting back to my roots, as it were, and also just doing more research. And that's kind of how I met Jared Tate. So it
Oh,
turns out,
yes.
so Jared is, very well known Chickasaw composer. He's doing amazing things. But I just literally did a Google search for Chickasaw music. His name came right up, and I read his bio, and I saw that he had attended Northwestern University, which is where I currently teach. So I, of course, was so excited. I kind of stalked him a little bit and wrote him and said, "Can we please jump on a Zoom call? I would love to meet you." And of course, he was,
Right?
willing, and we talked for, I don't know, it was a long time over Zoom.
I bet, because he's
Yeah,
so,
yes,
like, he's so
yes.
collaborative. He wants to
Yes,
bring other
definitely.
composers together that are native or just composers in general. I love that about him.
Yeah, me too. Exactly. And so we had a great conversation. He was so extremely helpful. And then, yeah, that kind of just started my journey on just wanting to find out more about Chickasaw music and specifically Chickasaw music, how it relates to my family ancestors and their stories.
Mhm.
So because the reason why I started on this journey is because I am a citizen of the Chickasaw Nation. I have been ever since, I can remember. I'm not even sure exactly when it was. I was pretty young when I got my citizenship.
Mhm.
And of course, so my Chickasaw line goes through my mom's side. And my I had this portrait growing up that I would look at in my parents' home in their living room that they had hung up of my great 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 my fourth great grandmother, and all they would say was her name was Pa I Sha. And so I would look at her portrait, and of course you could see just, I mean, she must be a very strong woman to have lived during those times, right? And
Yeah.
so I just started digging in a little bit more about what time exactly was she living in. Because I had always heard that she walked what a lot of people call the Trail of Tears. The Chickasaw tribes actually, they call it the removal. She walked the removal. My Her and her family, they're originally from northern Mississippi near Horn Lake. And
Okay.
so they were on that journey, that 800-mile journey. It says that she was in Oklahoma Indian Territory in 1838, or at least like that's when it's documented. But that was when the Chickasaws walked the trail. They were the last of the five civilized tribes to do that. I had also heard the story of another one of my Chickasaw ancestors who actually was her daughter that married, they said, an Englishman. I actually found out he was a Civil War soldier, and found out through more research a little love story there while he was serving and fighting the Civil War. He met her and then he promised to come back and marry her, which he did. And another thing I found out Shaw was that her father was Captain James Wolfe, who was one of the chiefs who signed the Treaty of Pontotoc Creek. And so that's one of the mysteries that you alluded to, is because we've been searching for him, and I haven't been able to find a ton of information, except I was able to find his Indian name, which I cannot pronounce and would have to look at the spelling to spell it out to you. But yeah, but at least I found that. But his son, Jonas Wolf, was one of the governors of the Chickasaw Nation, so Pa I Sha's brother,
Okay.
and so, which I previously also didn't know. But
Hmm.
so really cool to find that out upon further research. And yeah, so there's a lot of stories in there. The stories that I'm focusing in on for this particular program called The Story of Pa I Sha are Pa I Sha herself, how she walked the trail, the removal, and then lived in Indian Territory. It's unclear whether she met her husband either on the trail or if she met him in Oklahoma, because they actually grew up pretty close to each other. So
Hmm.
quite possibly, he was a military leader and a very interesting man, as I've been finding out about him too. And it seems like, that possibility of them meeting along the way is a pretty real possibility. But so that's one of the stories that this upcoming program focuses in on. The second story is about my third great grandmother, her daughter, who married the Civil War soldier, and they had 9 children. And so, because their relationship was a little taboo at the time, interracial marriages, it took him some time to prove himself to be accepted into the tribe. But
Hmm.
he actually, there's a document that says that he was allowed to erect a grist mill, and that the tribe gave him permission to do that. And so I'm guessing that's a big deal if there's an article about it.
Right.
And but it's really interesting because her children, at the time that Oklahoma was becoming a state, um, there was a story that was handed down in my family that they actually, um, let's just say, lied about their degree of blood so that they wouldn't become wards of the state. And I actually found a videotape. My parents still have a VCR that works, which is unbelievable. But it's of my great grandfather, who's the last of my relatives on the Dawes rolls. And he's talking about how his mom said, he said, well, she's half, but officially she's an eighth because she didn't want to become a ward of the state. And so that's how they mark down their degree of blood. So if you
Right.
go by what's not documented and just go by biology, I should be a 32nd, but because their fractions were a little interesting back then,
Right.
my fraction is less than that. And so yeah, so it's very interesting, but the fact that not only did she claim less degree of blood, by the time she was in her 30s, she just dropped her Indian identity altogether. She claimed white on every census after that, and so did her children, even
Wow.
after they became heads of households. And I wish I could ask my great grandfather today, like why that was, because he obviously was very interested in his Chickasaw heritage because he was
Right.
going around asking different people. There's handwritten letters from him in the council museum,
Oh,
that also copies of it, and the Halisso archives at the Chickasaw Cultural Center. So, and he helped another lady confirm her Chickasaw degree of blood for her 2 daughters. So there's like a memo and a letter back and forth about that. So he was obviously very interested in it. So I always had this question about, well,
yeah.
why would you be so interested in this if you're claiming white and you wouldn't claim, Chickasaw anymore? But
Right.
then when I watched that videotape and he explained in there in the interview with whoever it was that was interviewing, it doesn't even say who was interviewing him, but
Oh,
he mentions that about his mom, that she claimed 1/8. And what's funny is, so my third great grandmother is definitely full blood, but on another document it says she's 7/8. So I think that was also just kind of slipped in there. It's been a really interesting puzzle, just because a lot of Native American history, as I'm finding out, is filled in retroactively, because,
Right.
pre-contact with missionaries or what have you, it's not like they were keeping records and writing things down and having diary entries or anything like that. And of course, take into consideration the fact that the Chickasaw language is not even a written language. It was just the sounds were literally matched with our alphabet so that there could be a bridge there. And then here we have this,
Right.
dictionary, and same with the Choctaws, and
It's so hard. I don't think anybody, until they start researching their Native American roots, knows how damn hard this is. So,
I
I appreciate
know,
the work you've
exactly.
done.
Absolutely, yeah. And then not to mention, your family members can have multiple spellings sometimes of their
Oh, the
names.
spellings.
Oh yeah,
So
totally.
hard. What
Yes.
else would you like for us to know about your Chickasaw side of your family?
Well, gosh, I think, oh, the last story. Okay, so the last story of this upcoming concert, the story of Pa I Sha, which is kind of fun that it's the time of year as well, because so there's an Illinois connection in my family. So my great grandfather,
Huh.
who I mentioned as the last on the Dawes rolls, this is also interesting too. So the Illinois connection, my great grandfather actually married my so he married my great grandmother, who's actually from Illinois. So she's from Montgomery County.
Okay.
And this I still haven't been able to find out. But for whatever reason, they moved from Montgomery County, Illinois to Texas, to Hale, like basically like Hale County, Texas.
Hmm.
And yeah, and they had a 6 month old at the time, her younger brother. So I'm like, what would make you want to move with a young baby like at that time frame,
Right.
right? So there had to have been something. So that's another mystery that is yet to be
Oh my gosh.
solved. But when she moved to Texas, the Texas Panhandle, that's actually where my grandfather, my great grandfather, him and his family actually moved there too, to that same area, and were cotton farmers for a time before he became a postman. And his so what was interesting is her family, they moved around Christmas time, and her parents had told them, her and her siblings, so we'll still celebrate Christmas. We won't have any presents, but we'll still celebrate Christmas. So they got to the town, and the townspeople invited them into their homes and
Oh,
actually gave the children like corn husk dolls and little whittled
that's
animals.
so lovely.
Yeah, so it's a nice little Christmas like kind of story to how
Right.
she, yeah, like ended up in Texas and then met my great grandfather. So one of the things that's going to be featured is kind of a medley of Choctaw hymns that are also Christmas carols, to kind of show that, to help depict that part of the story. But I always thought that was a really touching story that
It really
that's
is.
how, and that's how they met. I mean, they didn't meet on the night that she was 12 years old, or, at least it doesn't seem that way, but they did get married. I think she was 21 at the time and he was 19,
Okay.
some years later. So, and
I
yeah, so
love this story.
that's
This
the
is so
concluding
you didn't
story.
tell me
Yes.
this one.
Yeah.
This is a fun
Yeah, yeah,
surprise.
yeah,
Oh my
definitely. So
gosh.
it's kind of funny that we're performing this in November, and then it ends with kind of this like, and now we're almost to Christmas time, kind of
Right?
thing.
It's a good segue into Christmas, and I'm
Yes.
currently learning those, Christmas songs in the Choctaw, right?
Yes, totally.
So, currently working on those right now. I can't wait to be part of that. I love
Definitely.
that story, and that's totally Texas hospitality right there.
It
Nicest
is. It
people
is.
ever, other than
Uh,
Oklahomans, of course, but
exactly. Yeah. Southern hospitality. We should say Southern. Yeah.
there
Yeah.
you go.
Yeah. Definitely.
But, something I love about doing Native Chalk Talk is that I occasionally will have listeners who connect with my guests when they realize they have mutual ancestors. And so when you were talking about James Wolfe and his son, Governor Jonas Wolfe, those are maybe people that a listener out there may have some information for you or have some mutual ancestors. So, listeners, please take note, write down those names. If there's anyone you know from your ancestral lines or a friend of a friend who does, please let us know. There's also another mystery is the Hayapuk Tukalo clan. The wolves were from that clan, right?
Yeah, the Wolves are from that clan, and it came out of an interview, and I think it was President Lincoln remarked because Jonas Wolf actually met President Lincoln a few times.
Cool.
I'm hoping that by finding more information on what that clan was, I can find more information about Pa I Sha. I guess more her other name is Amelia Wolf,
Mm.
and Wolf has been spelled just WOLF or WOLFE.
E-
I've seen that. Oh yes, yeah. So different spellings there, but so yeah. So hoping to find a little bit more Jonas
yeah.
Wolf or Captain James Wolf, or if you happen to know. So her husband was Charlie Chico,
Okay.
and he married several people after her. And this is
Oh,
another mystery about Pa I Sha or Amelia Wolf is that um, her daughter, she's documented to have one daughter, but then on her gravestone, there are three names, Erin, Julia, and Sally, and it just says sleep with mother, and there's no birth or death
oh,
dates. And so there's a question of like, who are these kids? Because
right.
for a long
Where
time, our
did
family
this?
thought she just had the one. Yeah. So
Oh,
anyway, that's another interesting mystery to solve there. It's kind of I did read up on this custom that when someone passed in the tribe, they tended to bury them near their home, you know, what they
oh,
were living at the time. Not
right.
not the same practice of today, obviously, with like funeral awake, you bury in, your relatives in a cemetery. So
Totally.
yeah,
Totally.
very interesting.
Okay.
Yeah.
So interesting. And I'd like to thank a former guest, Solomon Tonica, for helping us with a potential translation for Pa I Sha, which could mean lives here or close, and for Haya Paktukla, which possibly translate to two twins or two sets of twins, Yakoki Solomon. And if any other translators would like to take a stab at that translation, reach out to me anytime on my Native Chalk Talk Facebook page. We talked earlier about Jared and Pachachaha Tate, and I do have to give a big shout out to Jared, not only because he's introduced me to a whole world of Native musicians, but also because of his upcoming composition, Shell Shaker, a Chickasaw opera premiering October 27th of 2024 in Oklahoma City. I love that you and Jared support each other as well as other Native composers and musicians. And as someone who used to sing opera, I'm on board that train of support as well. There's so much talent in our Native community. So let's talk a bit about your work. You said that you are faculty at Northwestern and DePaul universities, and then you also work with some other areas, right?
Yes, yeah. So I actually am or I help coach the Baroque music ensemble at Northwestern, and I teach Baroque ornamentation and performance practice at DePaul University. And outside of that, I'm artistic director of the BBE or the Bach and Beethoven Experience, which is an ensemble that I have co-directed since 2015. And I also play with a bunch of different ensembles, both in classical and also folk music, in those two different worlds. So
So
I
you're just
keep
sitting around
busy.
eating bonbons all day, it sounds
Yeah,
like.
right.
Yeah, and to have a kid and a
And I
husband.
have a
So
kid, yeah, and
it's
a husband.
fine.
Yeah, so
And you're researching your ancestors, which you know, that's the thing you
definitely.
stay up till 4 a.m. to do sometimes, I
Oh,
know.
so easily.
Oh,
And then it's like, okay, I've got to go to bed.
I know, right? It's like this
Yes,
vortex. It sucks you in. The next thing you know, it's been 4 hours.
I know. Well, I guess it's better than just like, getting lost in cat videos or something.
Channels are, although that's fun too. For me, it's dog
Yeah,
videos.
totally. Yeah, definitely, definitely.
Wow. Well, you do so much. The press really does sing your praises, and not just here in Chicago. Time Out Chicago reported violinist and three arts awardee Brandi Berry Benson, whose four-string acrobatics and indispensable skill have been praised as alert and outstanding as her riffs. touted Chicago Classical Review, powered by a flashing blur of bow arm as they rolled out with irresistible glee, as the Washington Post acknowledged. So, lots of good stuff going on, and you're getting a lot of praise out there. As artistic director of the Bach and Beethoven Spirit Experience, as Brandi just mentioned, Brandi has co-directed and co-produced such season highlights as the re-premiere of Scotland's first opera, The Gentle Shepherd, an annual new music for period instruments project called Chicago Stories, a Baroque dance program and collaboration with world-renowned dancer Paige Whitney Baugus. Am I saying that correct?
Yes, I think so. I'm
Okay.
sorry,
As
Paige, if
well
that's
as
not. Yeah.
sorry, Paige.
Yes.
She's worked with Paige, as well as created 3 albums. She has appeared with numerous ensembles and orchestras, too many to mention here. And this November, Brandi, you will premiere a new work for period instruments called The Story of Pa I Sha, based on the stories of your Chickasaw ancestors, which is so unique, and I'm so proud to be a part of it. Listeners, I'll be sure to share the links and info for Pa I Sha on my Native Choctaw Facebook page. And this again will be November 8th at 7 p.m. at the Epiphany Center for the Arts. Tickets are just $20. But Brandi is also presenting a complimentary concert at Upstairs Theater in Evanston Township High School on November 7th at 6:30 p.m. So come see Brandi's beautiful concert, and I'll be there narrating as well, maybe singing a couple of hymns. And you'll be using period instruments, Brandi, right?
We will be using our flute player. She will, and my co-director actually. She will be performing back and forth between Chickasaw flute and her traverso, which is essentially like a Baroque flute of the time period. And
Okay.
then I will also be joined, I will be performing on period violin, as well as I'll be joined with 2 colleagues that'll be on period viola, period cello, Kioi Matsura on viola, and Erica Rubis on cello. And then I also will be joined by Michaela Marchi, who is, or Marquis, I should say, who has a number of different talents. She's actually Isleta Pueblo, and
Oh,
she'll be on various percussive instruments. Yeah, um, that is very appropriate to Chickasaw music. And so yeah, the period instruments. I mean, these would have been um, before they were modernized, to today. So
hmm,
essentially, the traverso flute has less keys. It's not totally made of metal. It's actually made of wood. It has a sound a little bit closer to, what a Native American flute would have. And as I was talking to Jack Pettigrew, actually, who, is building the Chickasaw flute, he was telling me that it doesn't really play like in a key per se, right? And the
okay.
flute in Chickasaw music is, from what I gathered, tends to be like more, of self-expression, improvisatory, things like
Ah,
this. And so there's going to be those moments where Leanne is having those kind of more guided, I call it guided improvisatory moments, because I've put some um, you know some notes and lines in there to kind of aim for,
right.
but then yeah, but then on the other stuff where she needs to have a little bit more like keys and everything to be able to play with the ensemble, she'll be on her traverso flute. And then with the period instruments, so one of the struggles, I guess, too, of deciding to incorporate, period instruments and having the Native American voice in that is that, of course, like pre-contact, you really had a select few of instruments that were being used, by the Chickasaws. And
Right.
even, yeah, even into the 19th century before removal. And this is where I'm actually currently very deep into research about all of this, because I
Mhm.
recently, I'm a recipient of the Thomas Sajak Memorial Scholarship from Early Music America. And so that was my proposal, and part of my proposal to research the intersection between specifically the Chickasaw and Choctaw tribes and the Europeans. And so I'm deep in the reads with that, if you're weeds, however you
No
say it.
pun intended.
Um, yeah, no pun
I'm deep in
intended,
the
but I'm like,
reeds.
yeah, deep in the reads, deep, yeah, exactly, into
Little
that
musician
research.
humor.
Yes, exactly. But what was so cool, so I actually visited Oklahoma at the end of August, and I, of course, went to the Chickasaw Cultural Center, to the Holisso Center for Genealogy, and to take a peek at all the archives that they had there to find out more
Right.
about my family. But then on that trip, also, I visited the Council Museum and was able to find out a little bit more about the Bloomfield Academy, which was one of the Chickasaw boarding schools. It was
Okay.
Chickasaw run, and it was founded in 1852 and took a pause during the Civil War and then was reopened again as a co-ed school in 1867. And then my history, or I'm a little fuzzy on memory of exactly like how much
Sure.
co-ed or yeah, but there's a music class, a photo of a music class of all Chickasaw women, and they're
I love
holding,
that.
yeah, what was really exciting was to see that they were holding like violins and mandolins and guitars, and there's mention of piano, and that there was at one point an orchestra and a glee club or whatever. Yeah, so like as and so they call this the golden years, between this 1867 timeframe and when Oklahoma became a state, because that particular school was one of the few Chickasaw run schools. And that was where, it was considered very elite to
Hmm.
have your child go there. And
Interesting.
they knew that it was a safe place, right? Because you hear all those stories about the federally run ones where, like,
Yeah.
basically children were separated from their families, and it was, to make them as white as possible and to get the Indian out of them. Bloomfield Academy was really unique because it was run by the Chickasaws, and they had the help of some of the, um, missionaries who served as superintendent and things like that, and teachers and stuff, but they had that music class, and that made
That's
my heart
amazing.
so happy, yeah, to see that, and that they
Right?
were exploring, and they were learning instrumental music in addition to vocal music. And so I'm also deep in research to figure out like what exactly were they doing, and
Yeah.
what did all of that entail. um, because I think that is a really important part of Chickasaw music history, really.
For
And
sure.
to see if there was some kind of exchange where maybe they were even playing Chickasaw melodies. All I know is that I've seen some publications from people who are doing field research and missionaries and things like that who um, lived among the Chickasaws and Choctaws, and they jotted down those melodies in our Western music
Oh,
notation. And when
so
I think
cool.
about, yeah, and which is not so different than what was being done with our language, right?
Right.
With the
Right.
Chickasaw sounds and Choctaw sounds being matched up with English alphabet,
Mm-hmm.
letters and
Mm-hmm.
combinations, right?
Yep.
And so anyway, it's prompted further research into that. But that's why I actually had a long conversation with Jared about this, about just, you know, how do I make sure and honor this music? Because obviously I'm not,
Right.
going out there trying to replicate it like a living history person, or even like the folks at the Chickasaw Cultural Center who do a phenomenal job of doing that already. So what is
Right.
my role coming in? And I kind of just feel like, because so much of Chickasaw history is, they wanted to learn the white ways because they felt like that put them on an equal playing field with their
Right.
neighboring, with their neighbors, and I
Exactly.
felt like they wanted to do that in all areas. And just reading that they were memorizing compositions to perform at their convocations and things like that, like I just can't help but think, okay, so um, I feel, more than okay to include strings. I didn't include guitar and mandolin because I just wanted to find out more about what they were doing with those instruments. Were they
Right.
learning, like, were they strumming? Were they doing, so I didn't include that for this go around, this iteration, I should say, of this project. But like I said, it's an iteration. It could evolve and change
Right.
as my research, informs me and causes me to want to do that. So anyway, that was a discovery about the Bloomfield Academy that made me really excited. And then I also, while I was researching my family, came across a document that said my third great grandmother, who married the Civil War soldier, that they
Yeah.
married at Bloomfield Academy. So there's a family
No
tie there.
way. Oh my
Yes, yeah,
gosh.
yeah.
And
So
they
I
may
feel
have
like it's
taken
only
music classes, right? Maybe?
maybe, yeah, or maybe their children. So I'm trying to find them, in other words, and trying to find out more about what all
Oh my
this,
gosh.
yeah, what all they were learning, and get some further insight there. But back to the period instrument thing. I mean, the modern instruments as we know it um, were, that was more of a later 19th century into the 20th century. How violins look today. The chin rest they say, wasn't invented until, that first half, 1830s, I think is what I
Okay.
recall of like the earliest mention of that. I could be corrected out there by somebody, but but that's how late we're talking for the chin
Right.
rest. And then the bow, as we know it, comes from that tort model, which is also, a 19th century thing, which is, um, which at the time, like this would have taken place with the golden years. But there, you also have to remember too that since the U.S. is a young country, and what was actually available and things like that,
Mhm.
that was why I chose to go more the period instrument route. To be honest, because although the Americans did adopt metal strings sooner than the European orchestras did,
Hmm.
that was more of like the turn of the 20th century. So still,
Interesting.
appropriate to use a gut strung period instrument, which that's one of the major differences. Actually, is the fact that those that we play on gut strings. There are some other slight differences in the construction, or I shouldn't say slight. A maker would say major, but probably. But there's differences in the construction, even though
Right.
they look very similar. And but the sound is way more mellow. It's a little more earthy. It's
Okay.
yeah, not quite as bright as you're going to get with, like, say, metal strings. And
Okay.
so, and I thought that sound more than anything was more appropriate, for the story of Pa I Sha. So,
Interesting. I
yeah.
love how you've taken the things that you've learned, which are two different things, being a musician and all that, your years of stringed instruments and composing and all that, and you've incorporated that with what you've learned in your research about your ancestors. And so to bring those two things together, I mean, surely this is like the coolest thing you've ever done, right? And I know you've
I
done a lot
think
of cool
so.
things, but
Yes, this is probably the outside of the Silver Linings album, this is definitely the most personal project I've ever done.
that's so
And to
cool.
date, probably the biggest and also most challenging in many ways, because again, I'm always running into this crossroads of just
Mm,
how do I be true to what the scholarship and research is telling me, and then also how do I put on a good show that can make sense for
right,
people, and that is, within my wheelhouse to be able to convey to others. So trying to
right.
make sure I'm true to all of those things is proving to be a challenge, and I've been kind of taking note and of different research and how it's been informing some of the artistic choices that I run up against
Interesting.
as I'm composing the piece. Yeah, so that first thing with instrumentation, I wrestled with that a lot. I still wrestle with it. It still might change even
I
after we
bet.
perform it in subsequent times, even after November. So,
Well, first off, if
Yeah.
anyone's going to judge your work in a negative way, I mean, it's kind of like, this composer is paving a new path. And there's so much to learn. You and Jared both are doing things that no one has ever done before. So, I mean, right?
Right.
I would think
Oh,
there's no one
yeah,
else out there
totally.
doing that.
That was actually
So,
part of his encouragement to me was just because I asked him this. I said, well, you as a composer, like, how do you reconcile the fact that a lot of our history did not use string instruments, and here you are writing for an
right.
opera and like all these things? He's like, Brandy, it's Chickasaw, no matter what I do. I think
So
said
clearly, right?
something to that effect. I'm not quoting, I'm not making a direct quote, so I'm sorry, Jared, if you're listening at some point to this episode.
Hi,
But
Jared.
yeah, hello. Um, but yeah, no, I mean, because he does some super phenomenal. I mean, first of all, it was really exciting when he agreed to share some of his solo violin works with me. So that's been really fun
Oh,
to
cool.
learn and dive into those.
Oh,
So that
yeah.
has been really fun. Yeah. But also just, to chat with him about that. And he just was very encouraging. And, essentially what I got out of the conversation, which is what keeps coming back to me, is the fact that, the Chickasaws and the Choctaws, we were people that adapt. And,
Right.
we were dealt a hand and, embraced the changes that we needed to make in order to survive and thrive, and
Absolutely.
still hung on to our heritage after that, even still. And maybe that
100%.
looks different in different ways, that maybe it's not exactly, the stomp dances, in fact, that are still being done as demonstrations. Those aren't being
Hmm.
done exactly in the context, probably that it was pre-contact, but they're still being done. The fact that when Jared is writing, I recently performed one of his pieces called Raccoon Talk that's based on one of those, based on one of the social dances, melodies from one of the social dances. And of
Oh,
course,
cool.
he employs all sorts of compositional techniques and other things like surrounding that melody. And but that melody is still in there, even though it sounds like a very 20th century piece. And
Interesting.
so I just think of that as like, well, he's still very much hanging on to the Chickasaw heritage and also incorporating what our people have always had to do, which is incorporate the quote unquote white ways into,
Exactly.
you know, our
Well,
heritage. So, yeah,
and I have to admit, I know that your ancestors must be looking down on you so proud and
I
just
hope so.
going, look what she's doing. That's so cool. It's
Yes.
such an honor. It's honoring them. And
Yeah, I
so
believe
this is
so.
more than just a concert. It's so much more.
Yeah, definitely.
So just a couple more questions. I mentioned earlier that you've released three, but actually now four albums with your newest one that just came out. Tell us the names of those and where people can find them.
Sure. So the most recent release is Silver Linings, and that can be found on any of the streaming platforms, Apple Music, iTunes, Pandora, what have you. You can also find it on my personal website, which is brandyberrybenson.com. And then the three albums that I released with the Bach and Beethoven Experience, those are called A Gaelic Summer, An Appalachian Summer, and then Chicago Stories. And A
Fun.
Gaelic Summer, yeah, those are super fun programs. They were awesome to record. A Gaelic Summer is basically fiddle tunes and drinking songs and just silly songs, all from the 17th and 18th centuries, Ireland,
Love it.
England, Wales, Scotland. So lots to have fun with there, which incidentally, a lot of our American fiddle music has roots in. An Appalachian Summer explores more of those roots and includes music from the Appalachian region and also a lot of ties to different fiddlers and folk communities outside of the Appalachian region as well. And so an Appalachian Summer has a very folky sound. Chicago Stories is really unique because we collaborated with six different composers that are from Chicago, and they each chose a community to, or an individual from a community to write about. So, for example, one of them interviewed two Assyrian refugees that fled Iraq and now have their home in like Rogers Park and Lincolnwood
Oh, wow.
in Chicagoland. And then, so he set their stories to music. Another one wrote about his grandfather traveling. He immigrated from Gothenburg, Sweden, to basically like Andersonville, and there's that huge Swedish population there. And
Okay.
was he was actually a minister at one of the very long time churches that's been there over 100 years
Wow.
there. So he set his grandfather's story to music, and then also as another example, we had one of our composers. She interviewed two minorities that were in executive positions. One was in the two minority women, I should say, or women of
Okay.
color in the both in the nonprofit sector and the corporate world, and wrote pieces like based on their experiences as well. One of them imitates like a musical board meeting, which is kind of interesting and
Oh,
fun
neat. I
collection, and you
love
could
that.
hear
Oh
all
my
the
gosh.
different, yeah, all the different flavors, if you will, of Chicago neighborhoods. We're telling the stories that you're not going to hear as a tourist.
Exactly.
And
Okay.
so, yeah, so that's what that album is all about. So I guess in a way, we were due for more stories that are set to music. And so
Right.
the story of Pa I Sha, then now taking it to my family. So that music is all, I should say, all available on the same streaming platforms that I mentioned for Silver Linings. And to download the album directly from our site or to purchase an actual CD, you can go to bbexperience.org if any of
Okay.
those albums sound intriguing to you. But if you also
Fabulous.
like holiday music that is not like the typical holiday music, we are actually releasing our carols album this December. So very busy fall for us.
My
But we are really,
gosh.
yeah, yes, definitely. We don't usually have these many things going back to back, but the
Right.
carols release, yeah, carols release is happening December 15th and 16th, and that's featuring we've done it kind of Advent style, but not sticking to Advent. So there's other
Okay.
holidays in there that aren't part of the Advent season that we're kind of paying, you know, like kind of like a musical tribute to in a way. So there's holidays like, of course, we've got Hanukkah, and we've also got National Violin Day falls in December. So there's a really cool
Nice.
medley for that. We've also got Krampusnacht, which not many people know that. If you're European, you know this more, but he's kind of like the anti Santa Claus, and
Isn't there like a scary movie called
yeah,
Krampus or something? Oh my
yeah, yeah,
gosh.
totally.
It's a
So
little spooky.
oh yes, very, yeah, very
Ooh.
spooky. So that one is a fun one. And then we also have some spirituals and some other folk tunes, and different holidays. And of course, we end with New Year's Eve, Auld Lang Syne. So we're kind of
Perfect.
doing, yeah, not all 31 tracks. It was quite a project to do, but it is. We've
I
taken
bet.
highlights, if you will. And we've even included one for Festivus for the rest of us and did our own version of that. So if that is intriguing to you, you should definitely come out to our Carol's release.
Cheers to that. Well, and
Yes.
that would make such a great Christmas gift. So it comes out December 3rd, is that what you said?
Or December 15th and 16th.
Oh, sorry, December 15th.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Which is
the
still enough
Carols.
time to,
Oh, yeah.
buy that and just listen to it for the rest of December or send it to someone, buy it as a gift.
Totally.
So, I mean, you guys, we have the perfect stocking stuffers for you if you're looking. So,
Yes.
all right. So there's the albums and Pa I Sha coming up in November, and you're teaching. You've got a lot going on. So, listeners, let us know if you have any info on the mysterious Jonas or James Wolfe Fellows. Hopefully, we'll get some answers. But, Brandy,
Yes.
before we go, are there any words of wisdom you would like to share with our listeners?
Words of wisdom. Oh gosh. I'll share actually what came out of Jared's and my conversation, which is that there is what he said, and I think is so true, is that there is so much power in the details and the nuances of who you are. And so I'll just, I guess, leave it with that.
I love that. Very well said. Brandi Yakoki, for sharing your talents and for all the good work you're doing. God bless.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to Native Chalk Talk. Be sure to join our community on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Simply search for Native Chalk Talk. That's Native, CHOCTALK. And check us out at nativechalktalk.com. Stay tuned for the next episode. You're going to love it. Yakoki. Thank you, my friends.